All right, let's talk Dallas Cowboys. I'm Nick, and this is our daily Cowboys show. Obviously, the Cowboys in the middle of their preparation for their massive Thursday night matchup, just a few days away. Interesting updates when it comes to a couple key young players. I know a lot of these guys are fan favorites, and I think you guys will, I don't know if you'll love the news or hate the news, but it certainly will be very interesting, and we'll get to all of that in just 1 second. But first, let's get things started, as we always like to on this channel, with a little stat of the day, a little palate cleanser, if you will. So let's pull up this post on X courtesy of Sam Hoppin, and he does a really good job every single week trying to compare team success rates in a matchup, just trying to see, hey, listen, how close were these games in all actuality when you look at success rate? You know, did one team hang around or win just because of big plays? Did one team totally dominate when in fact the score was really close? And this graphic does a really good job kind of illustrating it. And you can see, right, obviously the Seattle Seahawks, they beat the Minnesota Vikings 26-0 or whatever it was, so clearly they dominated them. What's very interesting is you go over to the far right of the graphic, you have the Rams, who actually lost in a close game to the Carolina Panthers, but they actually on a snap-by-snap basis dominated Carolina. And that can happen sometimes. You get big played every once in a while. That's what happened to the Rams in their upset defeat at the hands of the Panthers. But you'll notice the Dallas Cowboys right there, the fifth from the left, the fact that their success rate was much higher than the Kansas City Chiefs. And it goes back to what I said directly after the game. Same thing after the Philadelphia victory, is that the Dallas Cowboys didn't big play their way into the last two wins. They didn't, luck their way into it. They didn't fluke their way into it. On a snap-by-snap basis, they were better, significantly so, than the Kansas City Chiefs. In fact, when you look at the film, a lot of what the Chiefs were doing, certainly in the second half, was just Patrick Mahomes doing Patrick Mahomes magical things, finding a way to make big plays. If you look at what the Cowboys offensively were able to do, it was consistently moving the football down the field. Defensively, they made life incredibly hard for Kansas City. Again, they had to convert two essentially fourth and goals, right, to get touchdowns. They had to go 3 for 3 on fourth down. The Chiefs didn't turn it over. The Cowboys, again, on a snap-by-snap basis over the course of the four quarters, were clearly better than the Kansas City Chiefs, just like they were clearly better than the Philadelphia Eagles, certainly after that tough quarter and a half beginning to that game. And I think that's a sign of sustainability. It's one thing to win on big plays and some fluky concepts like the Panthers did over the Rams. And listen, nothing against the Panthers. I think they're a feisty team. They may find themselves in the playoffs before it's all said and done. But you can't win week in and week out against good teams getting outplayed that severely on a snap-by-snap basis. The Dallas Cowboys have outplayed the Chiefs and the Eagles in the last 2 weeks, and of course the Raiders as well before that. That's sustainable. Now, does it mean they win Thursday night? Does it mean they win a lot of games the rest of the way? No, they still have to go out and execute, of course. But what we've seen from the Cowboys over the past few games is a clear path, is a clear way the Cowboys, whether it's this season or in the future, can stack together a lot of wins and become a dangerous team. All right, let's jump into the news here. This first report is courtesy over Nick Harris. It's a couple days old, but I wanted to circle back to it. So the first post was courtesy of Dallas Cowboys Public Relations. The Cowboys designated quarterback Javon Diggs for return to practice today. We all knew that, of course. But that second line underneath there, I think, kind of went under the radar, at least according to me. And I think it's important to talk about it now with additional news that has come out. Additionally, the club signed running back Israel Abanikanda to the practice squad. Then Nick Harris noted the Cowboys have shown interest in running back Israel Abanikanda since he entered the league in 2023. He has a stout frame and a hard running style. He now lands on the practice squad after bouncing around San Francisco and Green Bay earlier this year. All right, making a practice squad addition so late in the season really has one of two purposes. The first purpose is you got a player you like, a young player you like, you want to stash him. You want to get him on your practice squad, you want to evaluate him, and then decide if he's worth adding him to a futures contract at the end of the season to see if he can become something throughout OTAs and training camp the following year. So that's, sometimes you see these moves happen, and it's not totally, unsurprising. Every team does it in some way, shape, or form, and that's probably what this is here. But what's interesting with the Dallas Cowboys is they already have two young backs on this roster, one a very fast, athletic guy in Jaden Blue, and one a physical bruiser in Phil Maffa that they used 2025 draft picks on. So you would think they'd want to focus on developing and evaluating those two players, right? Why would they add another young running back into the mix? And I think what we're seeing here is that the Cowboys obviously have not been a fan of Jaden Blue's development this season. He's been a healthy scratch for a number of games. They've turned almost 100% to Malik Davis, and of course Hunter Lipke doing some things as well as a fullback, short yardage back, catching a few passes as well. So you look at Malik Davis, they look at Javonte Williams, but then now there's the conversation about Phil Maffa, potentially his health, returning into the fold. Could he be something down the stretch? Well, that's where it gets interesting, guys, and that's when I pull up this next report, courtesy of Brian Broaddus, who I know a lot of you guys are familiar with, and I think Broaddus is an outstanding A-plus reporter and commenter, right? I think he's one of the best. He's got good sources. He doesn't sugarcoat things one way or the other. That's one of the reasons I like him. And he was asked, any word on Phil Maffa? Is he going to play this year? And Broadus responded, unless there is an injury, likely not. So again, we've got a guy in Phil Maffa who I know a lot of you guys are really high on. That you think he's got a bright future, and maybe he still does. But we're starting to see something here from the Cowboys, right? Obviously, they had Jaden Blue. They were giving him some snaps. They didn't like what he was doing, essentially replaced him, benched him, if we're being honest, with Malik Davis. And there's a lot of conversation about, will Phil Maffa be a guy to get some reps? Will he be a guy to get some opportunities down the stretch? And I never was necessarily against it, but I said, well, listen, the Cowboys are kind of telling you that maybe he won't play. He's never been a guy that's been discussed to get even any sort of playing time, any sort of reps. He's never really come up in any sort of discussions. And now we're seeing the Dallas Cowboys add Israel Abanikanda to the roster. Again, a physical, stout back. He's built very much in this style. Not, cookie cutter the same, but very similar to Phil Maffa. So now you've got two bruising backs already on the roster, two young guys. I think right now the Dallas Cowboys are looking at their young running back position, and they don't like what they see. They look at Jaden Blue. They don't like his development for whatever reason. It doesn't mean he won't eventually become a good player, but they don't like it. Obviously, benching him from Malik Davis, having Davis play a bunch of special teams and do a bunch of little things. Now, listen, Davis helps his cause. He had back-to-back games with splash runs, a 20-plus yard run against Philly, and then, of course, the 40-plus yard touchdown against the Kansas City Chiefs on Thanksgiving. But the reality is the Cowboys don't like where Jaden Blue is, and they certainly don't like, it seems, where Phil Maffa is. If you wanted to evaluate Phil Maffa, if you thought he had a chance to become something in the near term, you wouldn't add another young physical back to the practice squad. You just wouldn't. Now, there's, of course, the reality that Phil Maffa could be seriously hurt. But at this point in the season, if you missed, when the injury first happened, it wasn't considered to be like season ending for Maffa. If at this point we're dealing ourselves now, December 2nd? If you're not playing, if you're not, full healthy at this point, then that injury is a lingering problem, or you have serious performance issues, or a combination of both. My guess is it's both, right? My guess is Phil Maffa is a talented back coming out of Clemson, physical runner, and now he's got nagging injuries that's limiting his performance. And maybe he can recover long term, but maybe he can't. And the Dallas Cowboys, they need to find a young power back to add into the roster ahead of the offseason. Remember, Javonte Williams is an unrestricted free agent. They want to re-sign Williams, and I think they'll do their best to, but there's a decent chance that somebody out there gives Williams a ton of money, right? I don't think anybody will, but there's a chance someone overpays to the extreme and he leaves the Dallas Cowboys. So the Cowboys do need some power backs, and Phil Maffa seemed to be the guy to fill that role in the future. But based on what we're seeing from the Cowboys now, with the addition of Abanikanda, nothing with Phil Maffa in terms of being activated or getting any sort of chance of playing time unless there's an injury, it's a sign that the Cowboys don't like their two backs, specifically Maffa in this case, in terms of the future of this team. That doesn't mean that won't change, but the reality is, right now, they look at their roster as they prepare, of course, as every team does for the future. You got to do both. You got to compete for the here and now and also look to the future. It's very obvious the Cowboys don't like where Jaden Blue is. We all knew that. But now it's become even just as obvious that the Cowboys don't like where Phil Maffa is. Now, we don't know if that's injury related, if that's performance related, or both, right? It's been a lot more quiet with Maffa because he has been on IR. But obviously, you don't make this move. You don't add a veteran back, I should say a young, talented back with some experience in the National Football League, who has the same sort of skill set as a rookie you just drafted, unless you're not 100% sold on the rookie. That's just a fact. And that's what the Cowboys are telling us right now. They have Phil Maffa as a guy who they probably still view as with potential, but there's some real concerns. And it's definitely something to keep an eye on the rest of this season and the future. I know a lot of you guys are Phil Maffa fans, so I know you may not like that. And maybe I'm wrong, or maybe Broadus is wrong, but I just think there's the team will tell you what they think, right? They'll tell you what you think of players, right? The Cowboys, for example, activating Diggs, giving him a chance to come back and compete and play, not moving him to safety, saying no chance of that happening. They told you what they thought of Trayvon Diggs as a corner on this team, right? For example, they told you what you think of Donovan Ezeraku by moving him to become the starter, giving him a lot of reps, right? They told you what they think of Malik Davis by the snaps they gave him. Right, that's the Cowboys will tell you what they think about players based on what they do. They tell you what they think of Jalen Tolbert versus Flournoy. Flournoy plays more, Tolbert plays less. They cut Kyer Elam, right? The list goes on and on and on. They're telling what you think of Phil Maffa by adding in Abanikanda, again, a physical young back with a similar-ish profile. They're telling you that they're not 100% sold on Phil Maffa at this point. It can change. Things can change, of course, but right now, that's where the Cowboys sit. All right, this next report is courtesy of John Machota. Cowboys defensive coordinator Matt Eberflus on the last 3 games. It's been fun. The biggest enjoyment that I have as a coach is seeing the guys execute and them having fun doing it. That to me is the most fun you can have as a coach, and that's why you do the job. You coach somebody, teach them, and they go out there and execute, and they're having fun doing it. That to me is exciting. That's why I do this job. It's very interesting because the Cowboys defense over the last 3 games has certainly been improved, but it's not like they're the 85 Bears, right, or anything like that. They've been pretty good against the run. They've obviously done a much better job getting pressure on the quarterback, and the secondary, for the most part, has held up much better. Obviously, there's going to be a few bad plays and a few issues here or there. You're playing young guys. Kalen Carson, of course, beat up a young player. Revel, of course, rookie. Stewart, young player, right? You're playing Triquise Bridges filling in. You're playing a lot of young guys, still first year in the system. You're trying to integrate Logan Wilson, still dealing with playing Kenneth Murray a lot, Overshown coming back from the injury. There's a lot of volatility, right? And anytime you have volatility, it's going to be far from perfect, right? Continuity breeds consistency, and right now the Cowboys have no continuity. So there's not going to be a lot of consistency on a game-by-game basis, a drive-by-drive basis, heck, even a snap-by-snap basis. But they're playing a lot better. And I think it does speak to what Eberflus kind of was really drilled on in terms of earlier this season, his ability to coach and teach and send a message. And I think that was the question was, is Eberflus the wrong messenger? I think the messenger is correct. You can't play arrogant man-on-man coverage against good teams. The Chiefs did that, right? That the Cowboys eviscerated them with Pickens and Lamb and got a lot of penalties, right? The Eagles do that sometimes. We saw what the Cowboys did to them, right? We've seen that with other teams across the NFL. Dan Quinn, for example, has done that numerous times, and that has led to big problems for him both in Washington and at the end of his time at Dallas. You got to be multiple. You got to be willing to play a lot of the zone, right? You just have to in today's NFL. And Eberflus, again, had the right message, but was he the wrong messenger? And over the past 3 games so far, it seems like he may be the right messenger. Now, listen, they're far from an elite bunch. They've got a lot of flaws. Defensive end is still an issue for this team, for sure. A lot of issues at linebacker in terms of integrating everybody. Is Logan Wilson long-term, right? Overshown getting back to full speed. Safety position is still not so good. Quarterback is talented but young, right? There's a lot of things where you're like, there's bright spots for sure, but there's a lot of question marks and a lot of things to get cleaned up. But they're certainly trending in the right direction. And a big part of that has to be Eberflus, right? Again, new defensive tackle. Aaron Whitecon, obviously familiar with Quinnen Williams. Whitecon, the defensive line coach for the Cowboys, for those of you who aren't familiar. So he's done a great job working with Williams, integrating him in, to the defense, as was expected. We've seen Eberflus take an interesting approach with Kenneth Murray and Logan Wilson. He's kind of spoon-fed Wilson. He's averaging about 29 snaps per game since he joined the Cowboys. They've kept playing Kenneth Murray a lot, although I will say they seem to be maybe slowly phasing him out. We'll have to see what happens, of course. I think the reality is there's some matchup situations that the Cowboys aren't quite ready yet when it comes to Logan Wilson. But in big moments in the fourth quarter, 2-minute drill situation, we saw Logan Wilson play a ton of snaps the last couple of weeks. So I think they're trying to integrate him more and more. There's a problem there, of course, when you're trying to get Overshown back into the fold and another guy, Logan Wilson. You're also trying to deal with a rookie in Shamar James. So there's a lot of challenges there at the linebacker position just to make sure you get everybody on the same page. But hopefully we see more of Wilson going forward and less of Kenneth Murray. And that's just my opinion. Nothing against Kenneth Murray. I think we've seen enough of number 59, however. But when you look at this Cowboys defense as a whole, it certainly seems to be that the players are bought in. And that's going to be the issue going forward is can they stay bought in? Because they're going to be a bad game. There's going to be a game where things go wrong. They give some big plays. It just is in the NFL. The best defenses in football have a dud game. The 85 Bears gave 38 to Miami on their 13th game of the season, right? It's just going to happen. There's also going to be some good games. They're going to play well. They're going to do some good things and look good defensively as they have at times over the past 3 weeks. So the question to me is consistency and buy-in from this Cowboys going forward and improvement. I want to see Overshown improve. I want to see this defensive line improve. I want to see the secondary get better, right? If we see improvement, it doesn't necessarily have to be, statistical improvement on a yards per game, yards per play, points per game basis. But can we see good, solid, fundamental defense? Can we see good execution? And I think one of the things with the Cowboys we've seen over the last 2 games that's a little concerning is the slow starts, right? Now, a lot of that, of course, just is how, bad luck in some instances. You got, the Cowboys offense back-to-back weeks, Philly, 4th down stop around midfield, and then they throw the pick for the first opening drive against Kansas City. You get a 3-and-out, then you're going to get a terrible roughing the punter call against Philadelphia, right? So you get all kinds of weird circumstances that go against you, and that makes it hard to play defense. When things settled down, both games, Philly and Kansas City, the defense stepped up. So I think there's, that's not all on the defense, but that is a concern, right? And I think that's something Eberflus and this bunch is going to have to work on going forward. But it is true, when you add good players, good things tend to happen. Listen, the Dallas Cowboys trotted out against the Denver Broncos, one of the best teams in football. Whatever you think about Denver and Bo Nix, they're clearly one of the best teams in football. The record speaks for themselves. They trotted out against Denver a rookie 7th-round corner and Triquise Bridges, a Kyer Elam, who's no longer on an NFL roster, Reddy Stewart, who essentially is a rookie nickel corner, an undrafted free agent safety, and Elijah Clark, and then, of course, a special teams player who's a backup safety in Marquise Bell, and a rookie fifth-round linebacker in Shamar James, right? And they also had a rookie second-rounder Ezraku starting, which he's a good player, but still, rookie young player. I mean, that's just, guys, that's a preseason defense, right? I mean, that just is. That's a defense that you would expect the Cowboys to bring out there in the second quarter of a preseason game against the Broncos, and that's what they had to trot out on the road against one of the best teams in football. And you just can't win consistently like that defensively. You just can't. Talent deficiency just ruins everything. And nothing against Bridges or Shamar James or Elijah Clark or Marquise Bell or Reddy Stewart, any of these guys. A lot of them are playing good football. But the reality is when you have that much youth and that much talent issues, I mean, we're talking about third-string corners, third-string safeties across the board, right? Backup linebackers, right? It's just, you just can't play that way. You got to be healthy at least somewhere, and the Cowboys weren't on defense for about a month there. They're getting healthier now. Obviously, they've got a few injuries. We'll get to the latest when it comes to that. But they're getting healthy, and lo and behold, they're playing better. Again, talent matters more than anything else. But I think the big thing from Eberflus's perspective, he's going to have to prove the rest of the season that, again, he is the right messenger for what I think is the right message, the multiple defense the Cowboys are trying to implement. All right, this next report, talking injuries, is courtesy of Joseph Hoyt. Second straight day of no practice for Javon Clowney, who worked with the rehab group again. Clowney, of course, has become a starter at defensive end. He had a really nice day against the Kansas City Chiefs for sure. Losing Clowney would be a huge loss. Because one of those things with Sam Williams and Dante Fowler and Houston, too, at defensive end, is that they've started to play a little bit better because they've been playing situational football, right? You got Fowler in some situations, pass rush only. You got Williams certain situations, Houston certain situations, right? It's allowed the Cowboys to kind of overcome some run defense issues with those three players by putting them in certain situations to allow them to be successful. That's why adding the three defensive tackles or adding the two, Clark and then Quinnen Williams, has been huge, and integrating them as well has been a boon for this Cowboys defense. Losing Clowney would be a big hit for sure because he is a veteran stabilizing influence and a good solid player, and has been for the Cowboys this season. We'll have to see if he plays Thursday night. But again, it's one of those things. Injuries matter. People don't like to talk about it, but they do. I talked about it a second ago. And obviously the Cowboys are getting healthier in a lot of respects. Diggs could return in some capacity. We'll have to see there. But Clowney being out would be a huge loss. And obviously the Cowboys probably without Guyton as well, left tackle, although Thomas stepped up against Kansas City. Have to see what he does against the Detroit Lions and Aiden Hutchinson potentially going forward. But injuries happen. Every team's got them. Every team's down starters. You just got to find a way to overcome. But that's going to be the challenge for the Dallas Cowboys defensively and offensively too. Really, every team has the same challenge at this point, is how do you overcome these bumps and bruises and these injuries and still get your team to improve and play well? That's what we're going to have to find out Thursday night, because after missing back-to-back practices, things aren't looking so good for Javon Clowney. Now, for the rest of the defense, I will say things look pretty good. Kalen Carson seems likely to return. Not a whole lot of concern when it comes to Malik Hooker. Jerron Bland seems fine as well, right? Overshown, is healthy, still getting more and more integrated. Hopefully Logan Wilson gets more opportunities, right? No issues with the three defensive tackles so far. Perry Winfrey is also available to be a depth guy. Solomon Thomas, no issues there. So, again, they've got enough guys there to fill out they don't have any sort of scary deficiency. But when you're playing good teams, and the Lions have some injuries too. So both teams, every team has injuries. Every team's beat up. It's just, there's levels to it right now. And obviously the Cowboys are a little more healthy than they've been prior to the bye for sure. But the reality is this is where coaching is going to matter. This is where Eberflus and Shoddy and obviously all these guys are going to have to come up with plans to deal with these injuries. Now, maybe Clowney can play. He hasn't been ruled out. We'll obviously find out later today his status. I think if you miss back-to-back practices, though, not looking too good. Now, to be fair, he is a veteran. He is a guy that, if he's a guy that can maybe find a way to get it done, he would be one of those guys. He's played a lot of football. He's an experienced guy. And because he's a little older, they're more likely, I think, to be conservative with him in terms of having him go through practice. We'll have to see, of course, how things shake out. But at this point, it looks like Clowney will not play, and the Cowboys will have to come up with a solution to this tough loss to one of their key starters, really a guy who's emerged as a big player the last 3 games. All right, this next report, courtesy of Adam Schefter. The New Jersey home of Eagles offensive coordinator Kevin Patola was vandalized with eggs early Saturday morning, according to the Morristown Police Department. All right, so this is sort of a running theme. I talked about this when the Philadelphia Eagles, I believe it was in New Jersey, there's a school close to Philadelphia that had pictures on punching bags of Cowboys players and had elementary school kids punch the punching bags with basically punch Dak Prescott's face, CeeDee Lamb's face, whoever, and put it on social media because they thought or get it filmed at least, because they thought it was a genius idea. And here you have the Eagles fan base following that up. That was, teachers and administrators at the school. That's obviously stupid and moronic and has its own issues that we talked about at the time. And here we go. The Eagles fan base continues to just lower the bar for their standard of behavior. And it goes back to what I talked about before when people said, like, would you be willing to mortgage, a lot of, using void years the way Philadelphia has done and all the decisions they made, would you be willing to mortgage your future for one championship? And some people in the comment section said, yeah, absolutely. But you look at the Eagles, right? They got their championship last year. And they're the defending champions. They're a playoff team. And they're literally egging their offensive coordinator's house. They're miserable. They hate their lives. And I get it. It's Philly. I understand it's the Eagles fan base. I get all of that. But it is one of those things when you don't establish systems and processes. The goal should be putting in the processes. The goal should be setting yourself up for sustained success, whether it's one championship, 4 or none, or just winning a lot of games and playing good football, playing championship football. That should be the goal. The Philadelphia Eagles as an organization, remember, they encourage this behavior. The Eagles ownership, all these guys, they love, Nick Sirianni loves this, right? He may not come out and say it publicly, but they basically encourage it. They cheer it on. They love it from their fan base. They've done this for years. It's not just a Sirianni thing. He's part of it now, but the Eagles have been about this for so long. I think it's honestly one of the reasons why Andy Reid ended up leaving Philadelphia. Obviously, there's other issues there, but I think the Eagles looked at, Andy Reid probably just didn't like it. He said, listen, this is just not what I'm all about. Like it's fun to a point, but eventually it gets crazy. And this is what happened in Philadelphia. And it's a huge problem. This is an organizational problem. Or the Eagles ownership group is now going to come out and say, like, well, we don't like this. This is bad. We don't think you should do this. And, of course, they're right for saying that. But the reality is they encourage this. They encourage this from their fans. They encourage this from their coaches. Sirianni's the biggest jerk in the world. He's been known for taunting fans. He's been known for yelling in crowds. They got their sideline guy, their security guy, who's known for taunting players, who getting in players' faces. He's got his own problems. This is what the Eagles are. They're a miserable organization and a miserable fan base. Now, listen, I understand they're kind of a standalone case, but I do think it's important to call out. And that's why I always talk about when the Cowboys win, enjoy it, right? Because there's going to be tough games. There's going to be losses. It's a long NFL season. The best teams in NFL history, lost games during the regular season, right? 15-2, 15-1, stuff like that. The 1992 Cowboys, maybe the best Dallas Cowboys team ever, lost 3 games in the regular season. They got smacked by Philadelphia that season, right? So again, enjoy the wins. Don't be miserable. Don't be Philadelphia. And I know a lot of you guys don't need me to tell you that, but I do think the reminder, not just for all of you guys, but for me too, and I think everyone that's part of the Cowboys fan base, is say, okay, right, maybe things don't go right, maybe they do. But the reality is, let's not be these guys, because these guys are literally the worst. All right, this next report here is courtesy of John Machota. He was quoting Cowboys offensive coordinator Clayton Adams on the offense doing the Landry shift during victory formation. Adams said, I think it's pretty cool. In my opinion, I think it's kind of a respectful thing. I don't think it's something you're doing to shove it in the other team's face or anything like that. I think it's a really cool way to pay homage to the past and kind of tip your hat to where the sport has come from and where the Dallas Cowboys have come from, where this league has come from. I'm into it. I want to do it as many times as possible. So the Landry shift thing obviously started with Callahan, about 12, 13 years ago at this point. And I think it's totally awesome. Bring it back into the fold because, and I've talked about this a long time, but the Dallas Cowboys are the historical team in the modern NFL, the Super Bowl era. The modern game literally can be derived from Tom Landry in the 60s and 70s. Shotgun spread formation, 2-minute drill, third down running back, right? Multiple defense shifts and motions, right? Different personnel packages, right? All of that can be derived. Gap defense, fundamental gap defense, right? All of those things can be derived all the way back to the Landry Dallas Cowboys. Modern coaching, using analytics, using computers, things like that. That could all be, really forced back to the Dallas Cowboys. Really in the weeds, like boots on the ground scouting, going to lower level, colleges, things like that. Gil Brandt, Tex Schramm, all of that is the Landry Cowboys. Every single piece of that. And a lot of people don't want to talk about it in terms of in the NFL sphere because it would just acknowledge the Cowboys and the impact they've had on the modern game. You got guys like Bill Belichick, of course, who will do that because they respect the history of the game. But a lot of people in the media and a lot of fans of opposing teams, they don't want to really acknowledge that because it just upsets their narrative. They don't like the idea of how much every single thing they see on Sunday with their favorite team can be directly traced back to the Dallas Cowboys under Tom Landry in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. But it's just a fact that it can. And there are coaches, and the smart coaches, Clayton Adams obviously one of them, who admire that and respect that. And there are coaches who have a special feel for history, and coaches can get that kind of vibe because they study so much film, they break down so many games, and they often go way back in the past. And they work with, they worked under veteran coaches when they were younger who did a lot of the same things, so they can sit there and say, oh yeah, I remember watching film of the 80s Cowboys or whatever 70s Cowboys, or watching cut-ups of this sequence or one thing or the other, and they get an appreciation for it. And I love the fact that's continued from Callahan all the way up to Clayton Adams and Shoddy today on the offensive side of the ball. Because I think when the Cowboys do the Landry shift, again, I don't think it's meant to be a disrespectful thing. It's not a way to embarrass the opposition. It's a statement is what it is. It's a statement that the Dallas Cowboys are the NFL's historical team. That the modern game, everything you see today on Sundays, can be directly traced back to Tom Landry, can be directly traced back to Tex Schramm, and directly traced back to Gil Brandt. And that's not an indictment of other coaches. Obviously, Bill Walsh had a massive impact on the NFL with the West Coast offense. For example, Tony Dungy with the revamping Tampa 2 cover 2 obviously did a lot of things as well. Monty Kiffin, of course, had a big role with that. So there's a lot of coaches that have done just incredible things to modernize the game and change the game. That's undeniable. But most of what you see in terms of core principles today can be traced back to those teams. 20 consecutive winning seasons, a team that that didn't matter the quarterback in a lot of ways. Meredith, Morton, Staubach, Danny White, right? They could win. The running backs, the defense, receivers, everything changed. When the Steelers dynasty fell apart with their really talented team, before and after, they weren't very good, right? Even the 49ers, obviously they kind of extended for a long time, but they really went from Montana to Young, and after that and before that, they were terrible, right? The Cowboys dynasty had 4 quarterbacks. 4, right? Again, Don Meredith, Craig Morton, Roger Staubach, Danny White. Every single one of those guys either took their team to a Super Bowl or multiple conference championship games, or in Meredith's case, it used to be just the NFL championship game before the Super Bowl merger. There's no other dynasty that can even claim that. No one even remotely close. And that speaks to the greatness of Landry. And that's why acknowledging that history, I think, is really important. And I'm really a big fan of Clayton Adams and the Cowboys for continuing that tradition. It's one of those best things to see. Obviously, seeing a Cowboys win is awesome. But seeing the Landry shift, there is definitely something special about that. All right, and this next report here is courtesy of at USC Nico. And there's been a discussion going around, switching gears to college football briefly, about Lane Kiffin leaving Ole Miss to LSU. Some people don't like the way Lane Kiffin did it. Obviously the leaving a program competing for a playoff berth at the time. And I thought this take here on X was a pretty good one. He said, if you earn $200,000 annually at your current job and a company with a larger brand and more resources approaches you with an offer of $275,000 for the same position, would you choose to stay or accept the pay raise? The logical choice is to accept the pay raise because you've earned it. That is why Lincoln Riley left for USC. It's why Kalen left for Bama. Talking about Kalen DeBoer. If you are a Georgia Tech fan and your coach receives a call to become the head coach at Ole Miss, for instance, your head coach will likely leave for Ole Miss. Kiffin deserves the opportunity. He's not the problem. The NCAA schedule is the issue. Yeah, and I think this is 100% correct. So a lot of people look at Lane Kiffin, and a lot of coaches have done this kind of thing in college football, and they say, oh my goodness, what about teaching the kids and growing these kids and, being a leader of young men and all of that? Listen, they put that aside when they got paid. When NIL came down and all of that's gone. The development of young men aspect, that's been completely thrown out the window. I'm not a fan of that, but that's just a fact. So if you want to be mad at Lane Kiffin, listen, I'm sorry, the player's getting paid now. It becomes more of a mercenary business, just like the NFL. Now, you can say the timing of it isn't great, but that's the college football schedule. Ole Miss, LSU, Lane Kiffin, they didn't set that schedule. That's just a fact, right? In terms of now it's their coaching carousel, right? In terms of coaches being available and bringing guys into the fold. Because of the recruiting game, it's nonstop, right? Imagine if free agency started, for example, after week 18 in the NFL, right? It'd be that kind of craziness. That'd be silly and idiotic, but that's basically how college football works. And so until they change that schedule, that's not Lane Kiffin's fault. That's not LSU's fault. It's not Ole Miss's fault. It's just the reality of the situation. Anyone out there blaming Kiffin for taking this opportunity, I also think is silly. Because it's not the NFL, where it's parity, you got a salary cap. There are certain teams in college football that can win a national championship, and certain teams that can't. Ole Miss, they had a great season. They can't win a national championship. They're not talented enough. I mean, they physically can, but you know what I mean. LSU certainly can't. They have the talent. They have the infrastructure. They have the resources. Look at the last, slate of national championship winners. What do you notice? Ohio State, Michigan, Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, right? Clemson, right? You're seeing programs that spend a lot of money and a lot of resources, a lot of dollars on their programs. Go back far enough, you find LSU, you find Florida State, right? You find blue bloods, USC, right? It is not programs, you don't have you get a magical TCU run every now and then, but you don't get an Ole Miss playing for a national championship, right? You don't get a Georgia Tech playing for a national championship. It just doesn't happen. There are only certain programs that can actually compete and win, and they have the dollars behind it. And if you don't have the dollars and the infrastructure, you won't win a national championship. It's not like the NFL. So I don't blame Lane Kiffin for leaving. He didn't set the schedule. And I don't blame him for being a competitor, wanting to win a national championship. It's what you should want to be as a coach. Build the best team possible, win a national title. The reality is Ole Miss couldn't do that. And they were never going to be that team. And LSU will be that team, or at least have a chance to be. They've got the infrastructure. They've got the money. And it also speaks to why I'm a big fan of college football, but I like the NFL better. Because there is no sort of, it's all out in the open with the NFL, right? There's a salary cap. It's a radical business. It's a brutally ruthless business. No one's sugarcoating anything, right? Kyrie Elam, you can play a bunch of snaps. You can play the third most snaps on this defense and be cut the next week because, hey, we got guys we like better back into the fold, right? Jaden Blue, hey, you were a talented young rookie we drafted, but guess what? We're going to bench you because we like this other guy better, right? That's the NFL. We all know that. We all understand that. College football still has sort of this feel among some people as, well, the purity of the game. There's no purity in the game. They played the players. They made them essentially professional athletes, right? It's a huge business with NIL and gambling. It's even larger than it's ever been before. And I think people need to understand this. And everyone who clamored for, listen, I'm a former collegiate player, but everyone who's clamored for the players need to get paid and NIL and all that, you got what you wanted. You created a mercenary business in the college football landscape that isn't structured to handle it, and you're going to get a lot more of what we saw from Lane Kiffin, Ole Miss, and LSU. And I don't blame any of the parties involved. I think it's just a fact. And I think it's also why I like the NFL better. They actually operate as a corporation, actually operate as a big business. And sometimes that's not a bad thing because that gives you structure, that gives you rules, that gets you, I won't say fair play, but it gets you some semblance of fair play with things like the salary cap and the draft structure across the board. The college football isn't operating that way, and we're going to see a lot more craziness because of it. All right, let's get into the comments section. Here we go. First comment up is from It's Juma 3231. 3 things in regards to Diggs moving to safety. 1, I highly disagree. It would be a difficult move. As a DB, you should understand the coverage across the field no matter the position. If you only know your responsibility, that's how you get busted coverages. 2, Trayvon's skill set was largely based on his ability to bait QBs and throwing the football and cutting routes off. 3, new surgeries later, he hasn't been doing that. Free safety, I'm assuming, would give him more space to read plays and put less pressure on him to stay on receivers. 3, Shoddy and Fleece have already made clear they want players who are multiple. We saw this when they brought in Kenny Clark, a 3 technique, and have him play the 1/0. So to say they wouldn't put a veteran out of position isn't something I can do. I've seen a lot of people saying Diggs is scared to tackle or doesn't like hitting, but I've seen him make clutch tackles and plays throughout his career, so I genuinely don't believe that should be the reason you don't try him at safety. But it is late in the season for a position change, so whatever happens. To me, our safeties need more help in our corner room. Yeah, I think it's not understanding the coverages necessarily, right? It's not like, oh, how do I, what is my responsibility on this play or that play? It's timing and communication and working with other players and getting all that down, right? Because, think about it like this, right? Imagine if you're a left tackle moving to center, right? A center understands a left tackle's responsibilities on a play, right? And the left tackle understands the center's, but the footwork is different, the timing is different, and communicating with your teammates is different. If you're a left tackle, you're communicating strictly with the left guard 99% of the time, maybe with the tight end. If you're the center, you're communicating with both guards. You're also communicating with the quarterback. You're calling out defenses, right? It's a different dynamic. Right? It's even though a center may understand the left tackle's assignment, the left tackle may understand the center's assignment, just getting that communication, that consistent timing down, that takes a lot of time and effort. That's something that you can work on over an off season, maybe over a training camp, but over a single week or a couple weeks late in the season when practice is dialed down, especially as the Cowboys have played a lot of football over the past few weeks, worn down, right? This is something that maybe could have happened, for example, over the bye, maybe even that's a huge if. But then communication, it's not just understanding the coverages and the concepts. It's getting that working group, that working relationship down with the other players around you. Again, corner, you're on an island, right? There's some communication, of course. Safety's a lot different, right? You're going to work with the linebackers, run fits, things like that. I'm not worried about Diggs' ability to tackle. Like you said, he can tackle when he wants to. We've seen it, of course, over the course of his NFL career. He's not like an elite tackler, but he can do it when the rubber meets the road. We've actually seen it a few times this season, actually, although he's had a few misses too. I think the reality is when it comes to Diggs, I just think moving him to safety at this point would just bring up a lot of issues, right? In terms of communication and working together as a defensive unit. I look him better as just as a standard outside corner in certain situations. I think that fits how he wants to play. listen, just put out Diggs there when you're doing a lot of man coverage looks, right? Maybe 2 minute or things like that. I think he'd be perfectly fine in that situation, assuming, again, he's bought in and is 100% healthy. Joe Funk 3121 writes, when it comes to John Madden as a color commentator, he was a bit biased, especially when it came to Brett Favre. For example, the Cowboys were playing the Packers, and it was late in the fourth quarter when the Cowboys had just taken the lead. There's still some time for the Packers to put together a game-winning drive. The Packers were driving, and Madden started going on and on about how Favre was going to do his magic and pull out a last-minute win. He definitely had the Brett Favre pom-poms waving. Then, to his chagrin, Favre threw a game-ending interception. Madden was so disappointed he went totally silent and didn't say another word the rest of the broadcast. Yeah, I guess Brett Favre was the one player that had a special place in John Madden's heart. So yeah, he was probably biased for Favre. But you take away the Favre bias, I think Madden was obviously A++. Compare that to what you see today with color commenting. Yeah, I'll allow Madden to have his Favre bias. Obviously, not ideal playing against the Packers and Favre if you were dealing with that. But again, from a whole picture perspective, looking at his body of work and what we see today and calling the games, I think Madden and the way he did it and the way he broke it down and wasn't always trying to like criticize coaching decisions or saying a coach should do this or not do that or give his own opinions constantly of what should happen. That's not what Madden did, and I think that's what made Madden great. He broke down the game in an entertaining way. A lot of commentators today, one, they're not entertaining. Like, I listen to Greg Olsen talk, and I'm like, okay, this is boring. You're not a showman. You're not entertaining me at all. What value are you providing? And number two, I don't want to hear your opinions on stuff. Just break down the game because you played the game. And a lot of commentators, they get that 100% wrong. Nas the Don 9624 writes, Trayvon at safety would be fire, him over the top, but he's not a tackler. Again, I think I'm not too worried about the tackling aspect. I just think the communication issue, getting everything lined up right. Again, you're trying to game plan too. Keep that in mind. You've got certain game plan checks. You're not just running base defense out there. So you got Diggs, who's if you were to move him to safety this late in the season, you'd be like, okay, you're a free safety, Trayvon Diggs. So, all right, here are your responsibilities at safety. Oh, by the way, while you're trying to learn that, learning to communicate with the corners and the linebackers and the other safety, here's these special funky game plan disguises we have this week. Again, it's not something you would want anybody to do, especially this late in the year. I think it would be setting up Trayvon Diggs and the people around them in positions to fail. All right, this next comment here is courtesy of Tino Santiago 1790. Why do they keep starting Murray number 59? He consistently gets beat. I thought that's why we brought in Logan Wilson here. Is he just behind on the playbook, or is this because Murray is a fluke guy? Yeah, this is an interesting one. I thought Logan Wilson at this point would be playing more. I mean, he's playing 30 snaps a game, like on average. So to be fair, he's playing a lot of football. The Cowboys are playing a lot of bodies. They're still playing Leo Fowler. They're still playing Shamar James in doses. They're obviously playing Overshown. I think what the Cowboys have just tried to do is that they're trying to get, again, this is why I don't like the pitch count thing, because I think that plays a role when it comes to Overshown. They're like, listen, we don't want to put too much on Overshown's plate, so we want to make sure Overshown's in the game, and we got another linebacker with them that's ready, and if there's certain coverages or schemes or play calls, they feel like Logan Wilson isn't ready yet or 100%, so they go with Murray, and then, because we have Murray already in the game, Overshown's already in the game, we don't want to mix up the apple cart here. It becomes a lot of things to juggle. I think it all goes back to the Overshown pitch count, and that's me being biased because I hate pitch counts, as regular viewers know, but I think that has played a big role into it because you can't there's too much volatility right now just to go, okay, we're going to put two completely new starters in. Overshown's obviously not a brand new starter, but basically for the scheme, Logan Wilson would be brand new as well. So we're going to put two brand new starters in every single snap. Right off the rip. I think the Cowboys wanted to avoid that. That's my guess. There's also a chance that Wilson is, a little behind on the schemes and the calls and all of that. And it goes back to the Diggs situation, right? It's one thing to know the scheme and know the call and know your responsibility. It's another thing to know how to communicate and execute. Now, to be fair, Kenneth Murray has struggled. So I think that's one of the problems I think the Dallas Cowboys have to deal with. And I think it goes back a little bit to the Schoonmaker problem, their young tight end that gets, targets and a lot of reps. And people are like, why does he get so many opportunities? And I think a big part of that is same thing with Murray, is that in practice, in the film room, in the game plan, they know their stuff. They know the offense. They know the defense. They know the play calls. They're working hard. They execute in practice. They're just not doing it in the games. And that can be frustrating for a coach because you see a guy that does well in practice. He's a smart player. He checks every box in terms of the game plan. Does all the little things like, okay, when he gets in the game, he's going to do well, and they struggle. Because that's the frustrating thing. Because you're like, listen, all week in practice, you did everything right. You just can't make the play in the game. I think that's what's happening with Kenneth Murray, right? They're on top of the Overshown pitch count and juggling the volatility with the rotations there. I think he's doing great things in practice. He's doing great things in the film room. He just isn't translating it on the field. And I think eventually that certainly will cost him his job. Emmett is the GOAT writes, talking about DBs and our struggles this year. Nashawn Wright is second in the NFL with 5 interceptions. Who saw that coming? Well, let's talk about aberrations and statistical anomalies here for a second. So let me pull up Nashawn Wright's numbers here while we're talking about this. So I think one of the things to consider when it comes to any football player, especially their statistics, is that sometimes you're going to have a great year. You're going to have a magical year. So let's look at Nashawn Wright. He's been in the NFL from 2021 to 2025. This is his 5th year in the NFL. Coming into this season, he had played 4 seasons in the NFL, 3 with Dallas, and obviously 1 with Minnesota. He had, in his career, 1 interception. 1. No fumble recoveries. None. Okay? 2021, no interceptions. 2022, 1 interception, none in 23, none in 24. And again, so we're talking about Dallas Cowboys, Dan Quinn said we don't want to, not good enough to break the starting lineup. And the Minnesota Vikings had him on their team. And they said, listen, he's not good enough to play either. And even the Chicago Bears were like, he's not good enough to play. They just had to play him because of injuries. So if you look at his career and you look at his numbers, like, okay, there's clearly an anomaly here, right? And listen, he's playing great, undeniably so. But it's a statistical anomaly, magical season. You don't build your team, you don't build your roster for anomalies, right? You build your roster for sustained success. If a guy has a great magical season, but he's really not, just things just broke right that year, and interceptions and fumble recoveries and takeaways, there can be a little bit of a luck involved element for sure. Not all the time, but sometimes. I'm not saying that's the case with Nashawn Wright. But the reality is, this is so much of a statistical aberration. You just can't assume. I mean, again, he struggled in Dallas, did nothing in Minnesota, and the Bears weren't even really high on him to begin with. He was a borderline guy to make the roster. They just had so many injuries. They just said, listen, man, you got to start. Credit to him for taking advantage of it. But I know there's a lot of people like, boy, Nashawn Wright, he's become a star player. I don't think so. I think he's having a magical season. Obviously, the rest of his career will tell the tale. But I think prior to this year, and even all through preseason and training camp, he was a guy that was far from a star. All right, this next comment here is from Delta704. I agree about the commenters. Give your insight into the game. I don't care about your opinion unless it's based on your experience, and you explain how it's based on your experience. Couldn't say it better myself. Exactly correct. Dino Lachaw 9397 writes, our running game is different because we scheme the run, pin and pull, duo zone. I'm sure if we had Tony Pollard back then with our current line scheme and coaching staff, Pollard would thrive and explode. McCarthy never had a plan for the running game, nor did he have any true scheme. He ran the ball based on number of runs and number of passes instead of running certain schemes to marry with the pass game. He only ran the ball to even out the passing plays. Yeah, Mike McCarthy as an offensive coach, the more time goes on, it just looks worse and worse because listen, I don't know if Clay Adams is a good run game guy for sure, and Shoddy's done a lot of good things. But when you watched Mike McCarthy and compared him to other coaches in 23 and 24 specifically, you were like, man, the Cowboys are basically just like you said, they're kind of just calling plays just sort of for arbitrary reasons and just saying, guys, go out there and win the game. Throw the footballs out there. Let's see if Prescott, Lamb, Tyron Smith, Zach Martin, Tony Pollard, let's see if you can win. And against inferior opponents, yeah, it worked because you basically turned Dak Prescott into good quarterbacks and good offenses do well like in 2-minute offense and things like that because they can kind of do their own thing. That's kind of what the Cowboys were, right? If they were rolling and doing well against an inferior opponent, they could basically just take control with the players on the field. They could beat the brakes off of anybody. But that doesn't work in terms of playing good teams. It doesn't work for sustained success. I think obviously what Shoddy and Adams doing, like you said, it is a true scheme marrying the run and pass game as opposed to, hey, we just need to call a run here, so I'm just going to call inside zone. Fair enough? Right? That was Mike McCarthy's approach. Adams, Shoddy, play action, motion, bunch of different concepts, pin and pull. We're seeing power concepts, split zone, duo, everything you mentioned there. It is a full running game and a passing game scheme married to that running game, and I think that makes this offense one of the many reasons why this offense is so tough to beat. All right, this next comment is from Bianca Robelo, Co7SI. I'm sure I butchered your handle. I apologize. Do you think we could afford to go after Max from the Raiders in the offseason, and should we? I know he wants to be a Cowboy. So there's a couple things to factor in. Is obviously he would have to be traded. He's under contract with the Raiders. So in terms of afford for capital, it would depend, right? If you could trade a first-round pick and, throw in some sweetener there, I think for sure, right? I think he's a Quinnen Williams kind of player, right? So yeah, I talk about this all the time. I always had good players. If you can trade one of your 2 first-round picks this year for Max Crosby, the better of the one, then yeah, you do it immediately without even a second thought. You probably have to throw in some sweeteners there too. They don't have a lot of draft capital outside of that, but maybe they could, I don't know, throw in a couple guys or something like that. Maybe throw in a Terrence Steele. Maybe a first-round pick and a Terrence Steele or something like that for Max Crosby. So, something like that. Probably would need even more. But could they afford that? Yeah, I think so. I think they probably could. And they, would certainly consider that an opportunity. The cap part of it's a whole nother element. Now, you can make things work in terms of getting things under the cap, but there is a limit, right? And the Dallas Cowboys already have to spend money on or have dollars allocated for Deron Bland, Tyler Smith, Ferguson, Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, right? Osa Odigizua, Kenny Clark, Quinnen Williams, right? You see a theme here, right? They got a lot of money already tied up in a lot of good players. So the question is now, if you bring in Max Crosby, you can find a way with some funky cap math to just punt the ball down the road and say, okay, we'll bring in Crosby, we'll re-sign Pickens and Javonte Williams, and let it ride. And listen, you can find a way to make it work, but you're going to have to pay the piper eventually. So it's going to really come down to, if they were to go after Crosby, they'd have to be very clever. They'd have to do restructures with Lamb. They'd have to do restructures with Prescott for sure. They'd have to get Pickens to agree to a hyper team-friendly deal. They'd be losing some of their draft capital, so they'd become a super veteran team. Again, Crosby's a great player, so I wouldn't be against that in theory, and it's possible the Cowboys could make it work. But boy, oh boy, the devil would be so much in the details for the Cowboys to pull that off. Northern Cowboy 8409 writes, I don't care for Dexter's commentary either. Nice. I think that's a good good look alike for Olsen. It feels like he's trying to be Romo. Maybe I'm just biased, but I don't think other players are in the know as quarterbacks. So hearing the inside, the play points from non-QB just doesn't hit. I like hearing Romo explain how an offense or a play develops against what a defense is doing. Why isn't Leofau getting more playing time? So Leofau isn't getting more playing time because he's an outside linebacker in 2025. We'll address that first, right? It's not like, a standard 4-3 or 3-4 where you're in base defense. Most teams' personnel packages this day, the standard is 11 personnel, 1 running back, 1 tight end, 3 wide receivers, right? So if you want to match that up across the board, you go 3 corners, right? If you have 3 corners, 2 safeties, it means you have 2 linebackers, right? So if you look at Leofau, who's an outside linebacker, he's the odd man out. Now, there are certain situations where you play Leofau, short yardage, goal line, and things like that, and obviously does a lot of good things special teams-wise, but I think the fact that he's currently an outside linebacker just means he just isn't going to get a lot of playing time in today's NFL, right? If it's 2003, it's a different story, but it's not 2003, right? So I think that's a big part of it, right? It's sort of like a fullback. Why doesn't Hunter Lipke play more? Well, because you want to get your playmakers on the field, right? It's a similar kind of concept. When it comes to Greg Olsen, yeah, I think for me, it's just, I do think you bring up a good point. It's like, listen, you were a tight end, break down tight ends. Break down the passing game from that perspective. Break down the running game from that perspective. When I do the film reviews on this channel, I just put out one on Nate Thomas, by the way, if you guys want to check it out. As an offensive lineman, a collegiate offensive lineman, I kind of look at it from that perspective as, okay, from what I know about blocking, from what my coaches taught me, right? This is my opinion. It's what was taught to me by my coaches. Is like, okay, what is the approach here? How is this going to be called? How does he do on this play? Like, based on how I was coached and taught. And I can look at defensive line play very similarly, right? Because I can look at it from the perspective of an offensive lineman, right? I can look at, okay, here's what the offense is trying to do. Here's what the offensive lineman is trying to do. Look at what this defensive player does, right? And that's the kind of approach I can take. I can't break down quarterback play. I can't break down tight end play outside of blocking. I can do it from a blocking perspective, but I can't really break down routes and concepts and things like that. Can't break down receivers, can't break down corners. That's just not my area of expertise. Olsen is a guy who has an incredible amount of expertise as a tight end, can look at offensive schemes, defensive schemes to counter that from that perspective, but he gets all into the weeds of all this different stuff of things he's not, right? Can you imagine if a coach like, who was a color commentator, can you imagine, I think Jason Garrett, for example, obviously a head coach is kind of a different animal, but can you imagine if he talked about the intricacies of, for example, long snapping, right? Of the right technique to snap the football, you would say, what? That's kind of weird. You were a quarterback and you were an NFL head coach, right? You're an offensive coordinator. Like, how is that something you know about, right? What? That's kind of weird. It's the same kind of vibe. It feels like you're kind of just reaching outside of your lane of expertise. And I think that's my biggest problem with what Olsen does, outside of not being very entertaining. I want my guys to be entertaining. Right? If I'm going to put you on TV, I want it to be a good show. I want to be part of it. Right? It doesn't mean you have to be over the top screaming, although depending on the announcer, that can work, and it kind of depends on the person. But it's got to be a good show. It's got to be a good broadcast, right? And Olsen, it just isn't with him calling the game. It just isn't. Edwin Tirado-E5M writes, great show as always. We need to get some secondary players like Woodson, guys that tackle and put fear into some of these receivers by laying the wood to them. I don't disagree, but there's a reason Darren Woodson is an all-time great player, right? They don't grow on trees. But I do think a Darren Woodson kind of player would obviously be huge. And listen, I think the Dallas Cowboys were looking into Minkah Fitzpatrick, right? There's some rudimentary discussions about other players at the safety position around the trade deadline. So I think the Cowboys understand that, right? Obviously, the Ravens have Kyle Hamilton, who's a phenomenal player. right? The Seattle Seahawks have Nick Amonwori, who's a rookie player who the Cowboys are going to hopefully try and find their version of that in the upcoming draft. But the reality is, there's just so few of them left. And the safety position has become one of these weird, undervalued positions because of how important corner play is and how important the pass rush is. Safety has been much more relegated to, hey, if you're elite, fantastic. Otherwise, just try not to be bad. Now, unfortunately for Dallas this year, a lot of safety play, some of it due to injuries, some of it due to poor play, has been really bad. So I think it's definitely a huge position of weakness. To me, defensive end depth-wise is the number 2 area of concern for Dallas. I think the safety position, talent-wise, is the biggest one. Donovan Wilson, not a great player. Nothing against Wilson. Think he tries hard. Think he competes. Not a great safety. Marquise Bell is a backup at best. Malik Hooker is sort of at this point in his career, he feels like a C-minus player. So right now, the Cowboys definitely need some talent at that position. I agree, it needs to be an area of focus for them going forward. BMR Collects writes, we have 3 players that need to be resigned, GP, Aubrey, and Javonte. I don't care how they do it, but they have to figure it out. I worry that they'll let Javonte walk, but I hope I'm wrong on that. GP, at the very least, will be franchise tagged, so he's not going anywhere next season. And I can't imagine they won't extend Brandon Aubrey since they brought him into the NFL, and he's the best kicker in the league. I read some speculation they might place the second-round restricted tender on him so that if a team signed him, they would get a second-rounder. But I don't know if there's any truth to that. Yeah, I've heard that rumor, too. I think that makes sense because, it's one you can get, generally speaking, not always, you can get a competent kicker in like the 6th round or an undrafted guy, obviously. So if some team's willing to give you a second for Aubrey, I know Aubrey's a great kicker and I hate to see him go, but you'd almost be like, listen, if someone's willing to pay a lot of money for a kicker and give you a second-round pick, you kind of take it. And I think that's what the Cowboys may do. I think they'll extend him. I think Pickens will be tagged and extended. Javonte Williams, it will come down to if another team just decides to give him the world. And listen, if some team's willing to do that, you just got to let it go, right? I would hate to see that happen, but the reality is Williams, as good as he is and as good a back as he is, it's not like he's been an MVP player. It's not like he's been a superstar. He's had a great season, undeniably so. But he's not like an all-pro guy. He's not nearly as important to the offense. Well, he's incredibly important as Lamb, as Pickens, as Prescott. He just isn't. As Tyler Smith, as Booker, as the offensive line in general. And we've seen this, right? Malik Davis has had some good runs. We've seen Sanders come in and do some good things. Javonte Williams has had an outstanding season. I don't want to take anything away from him. But the reality is you do not want to overpay for the running back position. You just don't, right? A lot of people sit there and looked at last season and said, oh, Derrick Henry, oh, Saquon Barkley. Right now, both of those guys getting a little bit older than not the same backs. Running backs, again, they aged not very gracefully. Ezekiel Elliott, great example of that, right? So it's going to be really important for the Cowboys to come up with the right number for Javonte Williams. I think they'll get to extend him. I really do think they'll resign him. I just think it will come down to if some team out there, some crazy team says, listen, I'll give Javonte Williams 3 years for $50 million, right? And you're like, you just shake Williams' hand and say, listen, God bless you, man. Go in peace because we're not giving you that much money. And I think that's what it's going to come down to. All right. Obviously, Cowboys preparing for their Thursday night matchup right around the corner. Injuries abound for both teams. Again, 3 games, 11 days. Just stinks for every team involved. The Cowboys playing the Thursday after Thanksgiving for the first time since 2023. They've done it, I think, a couple times. I think there seem to be a lot of fun games when they do that. I remember, 2007, they played the Packers, and that was a fun game. And then, of course, they played the Seattle Seahawks in 2023. That was a crazy game. Both Cowboys victories. We'll have to see, of course, how Thursday comes out for the Dallas. Obviously, trying to get prepared, get ready, try and work through whatever injuries they have. Clowney, a few other guys beat up. But listen, it's that time of year. No one's going to be perfectly healthy. You just got to find a way for your coaches and your game plans and the other players to step up in the absence of some guys. And listen, we'll see what the Cowboys do. And I will be here tomorrow, of course, to walk you through the latest Cowboys news as we get closer to kickoff. But until then, I am Nick, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection.